we obtain a yield. We obtain a yield in the sense of having our kids know where their food is growing from. We obtain a yield with a peace and serenity that we feel, you're fed, your soul is fed when you're out there. It's not like staring and, you have, after this, tomorrow, do not stare at a screen, go out and actually do something with the knowledge that you've learned. And this goes for me too. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. And so this is where, after that observation, and you see that, okay, we have a little bit more waste than we should have, maybe we can buy less food this week, something of that sort. Accept that feedback and use that into your system. Use and value renewable resources and services. What are some renewable resources and services? Wind, the water wheel. Dave, you can chime in here. Renewable resources, bamboo. A lot of our clothes are made from bamboo now. Our socks are made from bamboo. Produce no waste, something we mentioned earlier in talking about composting. Design from patterns to details. That's the other thing about permaculture. It's a design science. It's a design system. In regenerative agriculture, it doesn't matter whether you design or not. In organic gardening, it doesn't matter whether you design your garden or not. But in permaculture, if you didn't design your garden, you didn't do permaculture. So integrate rather than segregate. So if we see things that can work well together, we don't separate them in rows like monoculture. If certain plants grow well together, we integrate them into a guild, in what's called a permaculture guild. That's just one example of integrating rather than segregate. We can do this on the community level, right? Where we integrate different guilds. Where did the term guild come from? Guilds of somebody's good at making soap and another person's good at botanical art, another person's good at web design, and you all kind of come together in a collaborative way. And that's what we hope to do by building community online and through our Grow It Yourself program. We've hired from within. Our marketing comes from one of our members, our assistants come from another gardener. It's really magical when everybody, that's how you know it's working. That's what Jeff Lawton asked Bill Mollison, was, how do I know if I'm doing it right? He said the resources just come to you. And that happens in a permaculture lifestyle, in a permaculture garden. Use small and slow solutions. So if you're going to start this fall, don't start. You can start with design, but don't start with your whole property, and get overwhelmed by, especially if you have like 5-10 acres. You start with zone 0, what's called zone 0 in permaculture, which is your zone that's your house. And zone 1 is like your kitchen garden, the most frequently visited zones. So you start small, you design those places first to be permaculture. In our Grow It Yourself program, we don't have people start by growing stuff right away. We have in their gardens, we have them start by growing microgreens, because that's zone 0. So you grow microgreens first, you grow your sprouts, you incorporate those sprouts, you feel good after 7 days, harvesting them, eating them, feeling what that tastes like, what that can do to you, how that boosts your nutrition, your energy. These are small and slow solutions, unfortunately, because anything that's big, born big, is born a monster. Even babies, small, right? So use and value diversity. Diversity is key for balance. I talk about this on a different webinar. And then use edges and value the marginal. Use edges and value the marginal. What do I mean by that? The edges where your land meets the forest, where your fence hits your garden bed, those are edges. And those, if you look at them, they are the most diverse things that grow in there. The weeds are that's where all the droppings from the poop from the birds come in. That's where all the leaves get collected on that fence. And those are wonderfully productive places to observe and see what could grow there. Sometimes things will grow there that can't grow anywhere else because the conditions are different. That's using the edges. Value the marginal. Creatively use and respond to change. And that's like another I feel like it's another reiteration of self-regulation and accept feedback. But I think the creative part there is, where can you apply permaculture? Where can you respond to change? You'll find that out well, I'm not going to end this webinar with that song, but there's some permaculture artists that are so creative that have made a living out of making permaculture songs. So creative, and they teach children to do permaculture through their songs. So what will you do with permaculture? So now, what does permaculture mean to you? I'd love for you to type that into the chat box. On the last day of my permaculture design course, my teacher, Wayne Wiseman, asked the class this same question: what is permaculture? And each student was asked to come up with his or her definition and internalize it, even memorize it. For me, certain aspects unique to permaculture always stand out. And one is the very idea of permaculture comes to us in the shape of a pattern, which is one of the first chapters in the book, Designer's Manual, a Permaculture Designer's Manual, which Bill Mollison wrote. And the chapter is all about recognizing patterns in nature. And the pattern that comes to me when I think of permaculture is a spiral. Another highlight for me in my definition of permaculture is it's a design system based on observation. Words like whole systems thinking, whole system meaning you look at it holistically, look at different systems within your permaculture system. Words like design and observation are what make permaculture more than just a method. And although permaculture at its core is universal, each application is unique to its location, climate, and culture. Because it's such a massive concept, our understanding of it will vary and change based on our experience. There are other regenerative, sustainable designers out there who don't call themselves permaculturalists, but they certainly are. Some of them, like Sepp Holzer. Has anybody heard of Sepp Holzer? Or Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer Fukuoka. So Sepp Holzer derived his own version of permaculture quite separately, without using the term permaculture, separately from Bill Mollison. And I think Bill Mollison visited him, and they were contemporaries, and recognized that his way of designing stuff was permaculture, the same thing. Permaculture was never intended to be a cookie cutter template for mass consumption. It was meant to be a core of ethical principles to be used as a basis for food production, medicine, livelihood, and novel ways to sustainably support human life. So 5 ways to grow your permaculture garden. You guys didn't, if you're still thinking about it, that's great. Because maybe there's more to think about after this, right? For you to still kind of digest everything that I've been saying. Hopefully it's not just going out the window. But if you wanted to grow a permaculture garden, and this is not definitive, like do 1 to 5 and you have a permaculture garden. It really has to do with what your definition is. Yeah, still thinking about it. The first is to observe. Bill Mollison would used to say the first year in growing a garden is just observation of the property, not growing a garden, in implementing permaculture on your property. But so the first year is just observation. That doesn't mean that you don't do anything about your property. You can grow while you're observing, but you have to take those notes. The second is to design, to actually sit down, look at those notes, look at what you remember, analyze it, and then draw out your property on a map and design it with what what the current, however much you know about permaculture and the zone 0 thing and guilds, and design a small part of your yard. Start small. And then when you do decide to go into the garden and start with sheet mulch and start growing your garden, permaculture doesn't advocate tilling, not because it's like, oh, this is a no-no, and it doesn't never advocate it. It's more like observe first. Okay, if your backyard is fine, it's kind of mulched, the soil is fluffy, then but there's no life in the soil, there's no earthworms, everything is dead, then something recommended is lasagna gardening. And we have a blog about that I can link to you guys and on the replay. Sheet mulching is another word for lasagna gardening. Basically, you just take the first layer is cardboard, and that's your weed or newspaper. The second layer is straw. The third layer is compost. The fourth layer is topsoil. The fifth layer is straw. And there's no right or wrong formula to it. The main thing is that the bottom layer is your weed barrier. Your weed barrier has to be something that can break down in 3 months. So usually your Amazon boxes, flatten them up, overlap them 6 inches, put them down on your garden bed, and that's your weed barrier. You don't have to buy fancy weed barrier fabric or anything of that sort, because that's not going to be compostable. And then food scraps under the weed barrier so that the rodents don't smell it. And then layers and layers of different things in your lasagna garden. For compost, so like we said, for it to be a cyclical thing, it would be good. And sometimes compost doesn't come the first year you do a permaculture garden, because you just don't have the bandwidth of learning how to do it right. You're just starting to learn how to grow your microgreens, and sometimes it's overwhelming to have all of this come at you at the same time. So, but compost is definitely a feature. Like, that's a permaculture garden if it has compost. You're making your own compost, that is. And then passive water capture, to just look and see where can I capture the water passively in my garden without tapping into the grid. Now, in the dry lands, if you come from the dry lands, you have to tap into the grid to get stuff started. But that's just the beginning. In the end, after many years, you wouldn't need to. So what did you learn tonight? Share your main takeaway from this training. You can unmute or type it in the chat box. I'd be happy to hear that. Anyone? What is your main takeaway from this training? What did you learn tonight? Nothing. And that's all good. I'll wait for your answers. So our philosophy at Permaculture Gardens is, like, this is something that Jeff Lawton said, not us. All the world's problems can be solved in a garden. All the world's problems can be solved in a garden. Famine, greed, health problems, and that's where we came from. We came at this because of our kids' allergies. Difference between permaculture and organic gardening. Yes, awesome. Ecological gardening is a fundamental way to discover God. This is something we believe. This is not permaculture. Permaculture is not religious or anything. Starting small